Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years, 6, 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to it. It is officially Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. And of course, you know, on a Wednesday, we get into some informative conversations, a little bit more serious from the other conversations we usually have. But yet, it's so informative. We've been getting a lot of compliments, a lot of comments from people saying that, wow, there's a lot of things we discuss here on Wednesdays that people never knew even happened in and around South Africa, or even some of the historical points that we usually make on the podcast. A lot of people are saying, wow, this is so informative. Thank you so much for these Wednesday shows. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you know I am accompanied by my co-host this morning on the Inside Show, Mr. Larry Varrie. What's happening, my brother?
Good morning, Xavier. Good morning to the Insights, the people that's watching the Inside Show. I'm happy to be here. It's a change of seasons. Now we're getting a bit warmer. And today we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Julie, who is from the University of Johannesburg. And I think I just want to give a little bit of an introduction on who we have here today so that people understand how the conversation will unfold. Grant, good morning, Dr. Grant.
Good morning, Dr. Julie. Thank you for coming through this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Grant has been conducting research in South Africa since the year 2006. Initially focusing on the Indigenous Khomani Bushmen for her PhD. Her work has also included engagement with the Xun and the Khwe Bushmen, although her primary focus has remained with the Khomani community. Over the years, Dr. Grant has combined academic research with hands-on community engagement, implementing development projects, and working closely with the Khomani's legal teams and the South African Human Rights Commission to facilitate communication between the community and the government. Her research interests span indigenous rights, land reform, poverty alleviation, healthcare and welfare, and perceptions of poverty and development, and the representation of indigenous peoples in media, with a focus on social justice. She has also served as editorial coordinator for the journals Critical Arts and Journal of African Cinemas. Dr. Grant's publications includes work on San sovereignty, the articulation of firstness in Southern Africa, and the limitations of research contracts with indigenous communities. Her most recent book, Rethinking Khwe and San Indigeneity, Language and Culture in Southern Africa, examines the intersections of culture, identity, and rights in the region. Dr. Grant, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I want to jump in here before we get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. I just want to ask you, Dr. Grant. Of course, when you walked in, I picked up your accent, and it was I was sensing some sort of somewhere British, Scottish, English, and then I asked you, and you said Scottish. So maybe just give the viewers an idea as to just your background and how you end up in South Africa.
Yeah. So I did a PhD in Edinburgh University, and prior to the PhD I did a master's, and for my master's I worked in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia was really challenging, so I wanted to go somewhere a bit easier. I'd already visited South Africa in 2005 on holiday, and I'd always wanted to come to South Africa, but during apartheid obviously I wouldn't come. So I decided to do my PhD here, and it was just a bit random actually that I worked with the Bushmen. It was one of my supervisors had done a lot of work in South Africa. Another one was Alan Bernard, who did work with Bushmen in Namibia. So I just sort of ended up working with the Khomani. So because some people sort of, go through, if they're studying anthropology and things, really want to work with Bushmen. But for me, it was just sort of by default. But I should clarify, I also call them Bushmen because that is what the Khomani that I work with and live with when I'm up there, that's what they like me to call them, and that's what they call themselves. So that's why I know it's quite controversial, but
But I mean, you working with the people, hands-on, first-hand experience as to what the culture is like in the spaces where they move and operate. And it's a very, very interesting. In fact, we always have the conversation about it being the first nation of the SADC region of Africa, right? And I don't know, Larry, do you want to jump in with any?
Look, what I wanted to ask you is why the Khomani, out of all the different communities, what drew you towards the Khomani?
And also, how
San?
does the Khomani differentiate? Like, it's I
The
think,
San.
yeah, like it's a different term than the one we usually hear, Khoi and San.
so the reason so it's the Khomani Bushmen, obviously that's just
Khomani
the
San.
title, the Khomani San. The reason I ended up there, so my original research in Ethiopia was looking at human-animal conflict on the borders of national parks. And that emanated from a trip I did to East Africa. And I went to visit the mountain gorillas. I mean, this is like 25 years ago or something. I went to see the mountain gorillas, and we had a great time. We went and saw the gorillas. And then we asked some questions to the guides about, what about the people who lived there. And it transpired that so the farmers that had lived in the area to make the national park had been moved out and they had been paid. But then the local Batwa people, who were hunter-gatherers, had been moved out and not paid and were living on rubbish dumps. So at that point, because at that point I was interested in reintroduction of animals to the wild things, but that sort of changed then my interest, because I thought, well, how can you just move people? And how can you move some people and pay them and move other people and not pay them? And then I sort of started researching that. And that's what led me to human-animal interactions on borders of national parks. So when I did that for my master's and I wanted to come somewhere easier, I came to South Africa. So the Khomani live close to the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. So whereas like the other groups like the Platfontein and things, that's not really an issue. So that's what attracted me to the Khomani San rather than the other groups. But then when I got there, I realised there's not really much conflict with them in the national park because they're 60 kilometres away. So then it just sort of progressed to looking at the land claim and what had they gained from the land claim and what had they gained from their land in the park. And that's sort of the role that's how my PhD sort of unfolded then, just by seeing what was happening. And yeah, so it took a totally different direction from that was originally going to take.
Dr. Grant, your PhD focused on the Khomani's restitution land claim. What would you then say are the lessons that you've learned from that, from uncovering everything that transpired with regards to the restitution land claim?
I think really it's all very well giving people land, but unless you give them support and services to help them, the land doesn't, it means a lot symbolically. And don't get me wrong, the Khomani love that they've got their land, and it's great that they have their land. But at the end of the day, they haven't, for a lot of them, their lives hasn't really improved. And in fact, some of them were living in Uppington, and had they continued to live in Uppington, they would have had better access to healthcare and schools, etc. Whereas now they're living somewhere which has got poor healthcare, poor schools, and really doesn't have that many employment opportunities, and probably never will, because it's not an area that so many people would have lived in that sort of area. It's difficult to sustain people.
When you say poor healthcare, because I think a lot of times people, when they just hear poor healthcare, they don't really know what poor healthcare means. They might think of it as poor healthcare that we experience in a place like Gauteng, which is completely different, or maybe completely different. So do you mind maybe sharing with us, when you say poor healthcare, poor services, poor water, things like that, what do you mean? What is the nature? How does it look? What does it actually look like there for the Khomani San?
Yeah. Well, I would say things, when I did my PhD research, that was about 2008 and 2009, I was there, and things have got worse since then. So back then, there was 6 ambulances to service the area. Now, that's an area that doesn't just cover the Khomani, it covers an area about 60 kilometres towards Namibia, up to Rietfontein, and also covers an area 60 kilometres up towards the Kalahari Transfrontier Park at Welkom, and also south to Nuniput and things. So it's a huge area. So there were 6 ambulances covering that area. Now there's 1. There is a clinic 15 kilometres away, and previously there was 4. It was actually 5, and then there was 4 experienced nurses. Now there's one experienced nurse, and it's actually just recently changed in the last few months. And as far as I understand it, the majority of the other nurses are now working under supervision. There's no doctor, although in 2014 we had a doctor used to come up. Now there's no doctor. So the situation is that if you're seriously ill and you go to the clinic, if they want to send you to town to the hospital and you don't have transport, then you have to wait for the ambulance to come or patient transport to come available. So one guy's been waiting over 2 years to go and see about his eye in Uppington. And then they did arrange transport, and then it broke down and they didn't get there. So he's blind on one eye now, and he's a crafter, so it's quite significant because it affects his work. We have lots of TB deaths, partly because people don't take their medication, but there's no support and there's no counselling for people. There's lots of people with HIV who don't take their medication, but very much if they don't take their medication, that's just it. There's nobody who goes to try and help them and understand them and support them. And TB is the same. Sometimes, we know TB's been passed around, but nobody's actually been sent up to the community to do mass testing. That never happens. And we have asked for it. And there's no health communication. Like some areas you walk around and there'll be posters or paintings about TB and HIV. There's nothing of that. And even in the clinic, a lot of the leaflets are in a language that the Bushmen, that's not, so they speak Afrikaans. So you'll get leaflets maybe in English or in other African languages. Police services sometimes respond, sometimes don't. The water issue has got worse recently. There are boreholes on the farms, but now they're paying for municipal water, but they don't have any money to pay for municipal water. But that's actually that's to do with the leadership and the decisions that previous leadership made and then current leadership are making. But everything's very much a grey area at the moment because the previous CPA, there was new elections in February and a new CPA had been elected. But now we're August now and they still haven't officially been elected, but officially been put in place. So they're not able to make certain demands or make certain decisions or access certain paperwork to see what the previous CPA agreed to and decided. So they don't have minutes of meetings and they don't have...
Do you agree with the CPA? Do you think the CPA is effective? Do you...
I think what does CPA stand for?
Communal Property Association, and that's part of when they got the land claim. When people get land claims in South Africa, they're obliged to either set up a trust or a Communal Property Association, or else you can't really own the land because it's just a legal thing. So the Khomani have had lots of problems with CPAs. They had... Initially, I had CPAs, and then in 2002, the CPA went into administration for mismanagement of money. So when it went into administration, the government were meant to provide sort of an administrator. But it's all a bit hazy, but it seems that nobody was officially appointed, but somebody did kind of do it. But then that eventually, the Khomani were going to go back to court in 2012 to challenge that because they were just languishing, nothing was happening, and they didn't have a CPA. So then in 2014, a farm manager and a consultant a few consultants were appointed to help the Khomani sort of set up a new CPA and give them training about what to understand. So we had a new CPA. It's unclear what they... I don't really have details of what they did because a lot of what they did was not very transparent. So the new CPA, it's a lot of different people on it. It's a lot of young people, and I think a lot of people who are well-intentioned. The problem is we need them to be appointed because they can't really do anything until they're officially appointed. So I've high hopes for this new CPA. I hope they'll be community-minded and, they may lack a bit of experience, but I don't think that has to be an issue. I think the issue has to be that they want to help the community and want to do the right thing. So I think it's a change. Hopefully it'll be good, but they do need support, and that's what's always been lacking.
So to answer the question, you have high hopes that something could come out of it. You spoke earlier, unless you were different. You spoke earlier about the fact that they speak Afrikaans, right? And at the risk of sounding ignorant here, I'm trying to understand when it comes to the issue of medical care and even the language issue. Is there any form of ancient kind of medicine that is still in practice at the moment like, some sort of something from a leaf, from a tree, or from a, something that can assist in that regard, because we've strayed away so far from the ancient medicine, and then at some point we made a U-turn and made our way back to the ancient medicine with the advent of the cannabis becoming a medication, thing, or even use natural medication. You use this; it comes from this tree, or it comes from this leaf. Is there still any of that being practiced or no?
Yeah, no, there is. Not everyone. There's some people. I mean, within the community, there's some people that know more about the traditional culture and practices than others. So yeah, there are some people who use cancer bush and just various things for, quite often they're making stuff and drinking it. Yeah, so there's a lot of that goes on. But when it comes to things like TB, you kind of really need the Western medication, if you like. And the people who aren't taking sort of the ARVs and the TB medication, it's not because they're taking traditional medication, it's that they're just not really taking medication.
At all.
No. And I think the ARVs, HIV is difficult because for a long time people feel and look fine. You can go on like that for years and years. So they do. But then quite often it finally catches up with them. So we do have a lot of what I class as quite young deaths, people maybe in their 40s, 50s.
That is young.
Yeah, so to them it's not particularly young because a lot of people die at that age. But so a lot of that, I think a lot of that's HIV related. People, maybe about brain hemorrhages, or people get TB a certain individual maybe get TB 3 times in 2 years, and that's a problem. So a lot of that is obviously related to HIV. But a lot of people that also get multiple cases of TB don't have HIV, but their lungs aren't getting, although you can completely recover from TB, your lungs need time in between to recover. And if you get TB, too many times in a short space of time, it really has a big impact. And asthma is an issue. It's, yeah.
How about the language issue?
So everyone speaks Afrikaans, some of them speak some English. So there is the new language school down in Uppington with Ome Gelmeed, and that's kind of gets support. In the Kalahari, it's a bit different. So we do have, there's a government school 15 kilometres away from the Bushman farms, and a lot of the kids go there. But then there is another school now opened up a few years ago on one of the Bushman farms, the Eland School, and it's a private government partnership. And it caters more to the local community, the local kids, and it's a much smaller school. But it only goes up to, I think, grade 3 at the moment. The idea is that every year it increases. They had problems initially getting registered, so that set them back about 3 or 4 years. So that's there, and they do have some language classes
for the Aboriginal language.
Yeah, but the problem is getting the funding. I mean, a few years ago when I spoke to the teacher there, so. Sissy Bock, her name is, she was struggling because although there are books produced, there's a couple of really basic children's storybooks, and then there's a book by Calda. You can actually download it online, and it's quite good. It's got like the language in English, Afrikaans, and Nu, and it's kind of a bit like a phrase book rather than being heavy grammar or anything like that. There's recently been a dictionary done. But at that point when I spoke to Sissy, the teacher, she was saying, I've only got one copy of every book and I've got nowhere to photocopy anything. So she was struggling about it. And she does get a bit of funding, but there's no real substantial, if they really want people speaking it fluently and regularly, they really need to put a lot more investment into it, and that's not really happening in the Kalahari.
Look, and I think this is why it's important to have conversations like this on platforms like this, so that people can hear, because there's a lot of people who may be in a position to hear what the problems are, because people can't do anything unless they know what is happening. So I think it's good that people are being exposed to what is happening in with the Khomani San, the lack of resources, the lack of education, systems or schools or books, even something as simple as photocopying is such a huge impact on the people, because now they are barred from education to a certain degree. So I think it's good that we have someone like you and be able to have a conversation like this and expose what is happening, so that we can sort of find solutions, and someone can come up and deal with it, find a solution or fund it.
Before you continue with, I just want to say to everyone watching online, I see there's a lot of people watching online, please don't hesitate to ask a question, to drop a comment, especially to our guest here this morning. If there's any thought, question that you might have that you want to drop, please, we do have it open in front of us, the comment section, so please don't forget you can drop comment in the comment section.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Dr. Grant, you've written a lot about the symbolic dimensions of land, that it's more than just a commodity, as what other communities may see it. So I want to ask you, can you maybe speak on how the land claims intersect with the identity restoration of those people?
I'll do that in a minute, but I just want to say something else. When we're talking about when you're talking about people being excluded from education, they also don't have any electricity, which means that you can't really have a laptop, or you can't half the time you can't charge your phones. People do have solar panels, but they not have, and it means if kids get homework from school, they're a bit restricted because they can't put the lights on and carry on working at night. So the electricity thing's quite a big issue as well. But yeah, the symbolic issue. So I think, and I think I say this in some of my papers as well about the language. To be honest, I'm not sure that it's, even if they do a lot of teaching, I'm not sure that it can ever be sort of their mother tongue anymore, because there's only one woman still speaking it fluently. But I've always argued that doesn't mean that people in the government or people shouldn't invest in language, because it's symbolic. And I think in the land, everything, it's people have to feel valued in the country. And and I don't think the Khomani feel valued at all, because there's not much to suggest that they're valued by government. So I think that the land meant a lot to them, and still does. When they originally got it, and they love having the land, and they talk about their land, and it does give them certain freedom, but it's very limited.
But I also want to ask, in the same vein, like, why you've been working with particularly the Khomani San for over 20 years, plus minus 20 years, and in my understanding, you would probably know why these people, the Khomani San, value land so much. Why is it that land must be returned to them in the way that it was, in terms of ownership rights or being able to use it, the same way it was before colonization? Why is land so valuable to them as the Khomani San?
It's actually quite a hard question, because the Khomani don't really verbalise to you why it's important. I mean, and it's different. The communities, different people in the community are very different. So one of the issues is the Khomani are not actually one group of Bushmen. They're different groups that came together for a land claim. And since they came together, that's also been a bit problematic, because originally it was the Kruiper family that started the claim, and then it was suggested to let other people join, which they did, and they got more land probably because of that. But then and this is quite typical in land claim cases, and then once you've got the land, you realise that the different groups have got different priorities and wanted the land for different reasons. So, and in the Kalahari, you ended up with researchers and people talking about the traditionalists and the Westerners, and then people don't like that and think it's divisive. But there are definitely people like people that want the land for farming, and are quite quite businesslike in their farming. And then there's the other side of people who want to live, have some land, have some livestock, but essentially they still want to hunt and gather. But they've really struggled with that, because it's so long since they've hunted and gathered that they actually can't really, a lot of them can't really hunt anymore. And so they wanted the land to give them certain freedoms, and even though they've got the land, they still can't access their freedoms. It's quite different from, so up in Namibia, I was at the Nainai, and Nainai is a big conservancy, and when I was up there, you still see, so the people are allowed just to go out and hunt with bows and arrows. That's fine. They just go out and do it if they want to do it.
That's the original old school way of doing it.
Yeah, but in the Kalahari, they can't really do that, because there's not really much in the way of game on the farms that they live on, and they do have a game farm, but they can't just go and hunt on the game farm because you need it's a business, so you need permissions, and also in South Africa you need hunting permits, but also they can't really hunt with bow and arrows for the most part. They have. And initially it's actually to the medicine as well. I mean, some people have been going up to Namibia to visit with the Bushmen up there to learn more about medicine and trance dancing and you know, the different plants and things. But that as well has problems because, you know, what's in Namibia isn't the same as what's here. And also the land, you know, in the Kalahari, the land they've got, it doesn't produce the same plants because people are living there as well. So a lot more of the plants are in the park, because it's more untouched. But there's limits to the own part of the park. There's the contract park they own part of, and then they have symbolic and cultural rights to the whole of the park. That's the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. So they can go in and harvest certain plants and wildlife, but it's very controlled and it's very difficult to do. I think it's got easier recently. When I was up there, that was one of the big challenges, because we used to run these veld schools, and the idea is that you have so many mentors or elders, and they take the younger people in, and they go and stay in the park for a couple of weeks and do tracking, and you know, they're taught about the animals and plants and the language. So we were doing that, and they still do it. But yeah, there's kind of, even though they own part of the park, there's still a lot of loops to jump through. So that I guess that's typical of the whole land claim. They've got this land, but there's still all these loops that you have to jump through. Yeah, you can't just go and do what you want.
And then in terms of how the state's understanding of community, we take the CPA as an example, how did the state's understanding, the government's understanding of community impact the way that the Khomani land claim was approached?
Well, I think, the Khomani didn't get the land because they were indigenous or because they were First Peoples or anything like that. They got the land the same as everyone else got the land because they were removed from the land in the 1930s, between the 1930s and 70s. So it didn't take into account that they had been removed from land before that. That was the part.
Long before that.
Yeah. So it was because they'd been pushed north because, you know, there was a white settlement in Askham and there was white farmers, and they'd been gradually getting pushed out. So it was when the park was established. And actually they were claiming the park land. They weren't claiming the farms that live on now. They were claiming the park. But obviously they weren't going to get that. So, you know, the compromise was to give them these farms outside.
Why were they not going to get it?
Because it's a park. It's quite a lucrative park, I understand.
That's why they're not going to get it. So, someone's already got their hands in there.
Well, we know that as a fact. We've seen it happen even in the Amazon cases in the Western Cape. I don't want to move too far from the Khomani because that's what we want to talk about. But I don't like to shy away from serious things like that. And, you know, is that it's because of economic interest. We know that people get moved off certain lands because it's lucrative for certain people, for white people that come from Europe that wants to invest, and they have interests with or make deals with so-called black people in South Africa where it benefits themselves, but the people are impacted the most at the end of the day. So I think that is important to mention is, you know, it's a fact. They can't make a claim on that land, on the park, because of the money that it generates for certain people. And I think unless we can deal with the facts for what they are, we may never be able to address them because we will focus on what the government is willing to do and not what is rightfully those people's, you know. So, so I think the reason why I asked you the question of how the state's understanding of community is because I would also like to know what implications that would have in the broader First Nation community of South Africa. I don't know if you agree with First Nation, the idea of First Nations communities, because you've done an extensive research with the particular community. Do you agree with there being a First Nation in Sub-Saharan Africa Do you agree that they are distinct people between other African communities? What is your view? I think these are also important conversations, because right now, as a Aboriginal person myself, I know that government tries to make everybody African, and on the basis of everybody being African, nobody can claim certain things that was theirs initially and was forcefully removed from them, taken from them. So in terms of your understanding and your engagement, do the Khomani see themselves as part of the first people of Southern Africa? Is that irrelevant to them? What is your understanding of that as a researcher that has a particular interest in this community in Southern Africa? I've seen you've written books on that as well.
So I think, so I think one of the biggest, it's a few questions there. So one of the issues that keeps coming up is that this idea of sort of democracy. So with the Bushmen, and this is when you've got NGOs involved in everything, trying to get their head around this, that, generally with democracy, you elect someone as your leader and he makes the decisions on your behalf. But with the Khomani, really how they would like it, I think, because they like everybody to agree to everything. So they don't really, it's not ideal that they've got a leader and he makes decisions. They actually all want to come together. Consensus based. Yeah. And a lot of the legal setup in this country isn't for that. And it's time consuming, hey? And it costs money, and because you got to go and talk to the people up there, and you got to go talk to the people over there. So I think that's one of the most obvious things, with all the projects, and, some, it's a project and the funder comes in and talks to these people and these people are all keen on it. So he thinks, okay, everybody's keen on it, the leaders agree, that's great. And then halfway through the project, he realises half the people are against it because they didn't agree to it, even though the leader agreed to it, all that sort of thing is a problem. I think the First Nations or First Peoples and the Indigenous status is important to the Khomani, and they do, that's how they see themselves. Certainly the more traditional people who I stay with when I go there, but I think all of them, they're aware of who they are. Interestingly, so the Khomani, there's about 450 of them live among 6 farms in the Kalahari. There's about there's over 1,000 people are listed as landowners, but they don't all live in the area. Some of them, they live throughout the Northern Cape. There's also 15 kilometres away where the clinic is. There's a small settlement of white people, church land, and then there's other, what they call the location, and it's a coloured community. And there's some Bushmen live there, but the majority of the people would say they're coloured. But obviously, they're probably not that. Their descendants are much the same as the Bushmen, and also at Rietfontein, and so there's a lot of areas up there of people who would say they're coloured, and they're not really that interested in the whole story. But there is certain groups, obviously, with the Khomani and things, who are very much aware. And I think the Khomani, over the years, some of them have been able to leverage that and make some money here and there. Every once in a while, the tourism department or some various government departments rolls them out to come down and do a dance, and then they get sent back up and they still get no toilets, that sort of thing. So that goes on, but they are aware of it. And I think, what one of the challenges is that, a lot of the time government don't like to separate people out into different groups because they see it as being akin to apartheid, which is understandable. But then different groups require different help and different services, and and it's also but that issue about equality and equity. This idea that you can treat everybody the same, but just because you treat everybody the same doesn't bring them all up the same, because some people have started off more disadvantaged than others. Certainly, I think the Khomani, I don't think it would be a bad idea to have sort of a culturally appropriate schooling, which is what the sort of, the private government school have sort of tried to do. They've tried to sort of be a bit more understanding of how the kids, the kids are used to running about the farm all day. So to go and sit in a classroom and be quiet with your hands by your sides and only spoke when spoken to, which is how the government school is, I think that's quite difficult for them. I'm sure it's difficult for other kids in the area as well. I think there's definitely needs to are cultural that can be met, because how different cultural groups have got different needs and different ways of looking at the world, and you sort of have to respond to that. I feel just to decide you've got a blanket education system, a blanket social development system, and everybody's just got to fit into it.
Now,
Doesn't
the
work.
issue on the ground is nuanced. It has different, as you're saying, there's different parts to this. And as you say, you can't just kind of give it one blanket answer like, all right, okay, we're all doing this, and that's it.
Yeah.
You figure it out as we go. It's kind of like, okay, let's see where these people are, and let's see where these people are. I'm showing Larry a comment, actually. I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question. I'm trying to make sense of it. I think it's for you, Doctor.
Which one?
The one from Eric. Speaking about him being a black person, but as you want to go for it?
Yeah, this is the statement question. I think it's directed at you. It says, I'm a black guy, from Eric Mobile Ngwenya. I'm a black guy, but I have a Bushman blood in me for people because they are light in color and grow in certain geographic locations and speak certain language is misleading.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the
I think there's no doubt that a lot of black people and Bushman people are mixed. I mean, I think that's kind of generally accepted, especially around the Drakensberg area. And lots of places, that's generally accepted. The area I work in the Kalahari, it's mainly coloured people and Bushman people. There's very few black people in the area. In Uppington, there's some more black people, and in Kimberley, and I'm sure they will also be mixed with Khoisan people.
They're asking what tribes make up the Khomani. Do you know the Khomani?
It's in my PhD. It's actually very complicated and very, but it is in there.
I think what is also important to understand, the Khoi and the San, particularly the Khoi and the San, are the main 5 groupings within the Khoi and the San. The San, the Khoi, the Nama, the Korana, and the Griqua have all been mixing with each other over the years. And although we know they all come from the San is the first, and everybody comes from the San. But the point is that even within the Griqua was a mixed community. Yeah. They were formerly the colored community of in colonization. And then the name just evolved to what we have it today. But the Korana is mixed. All of them are mixed peoples. The Khomani is a group of people coming together and forming a particular brand. Am I correct in what I'm saying?
And I think what you've also to remember is that a lot of people actually don't really know what grouping they came from, because you know that their history's been so lost. So even with in the Kalahari, I mean, there's certain groups that know where they come from, but a lot of it, because when you look back at certain names, because obviously different names, if you read about in the documentation, the researchers didn't always get the names right. So sometimes, you know, they thought, oh, that's a different group. And then it turns out it was that group, but the researchers got the names wrong. So it's actually a really complicated thing to look into. And also you have to look at, you know, some people break the groupings down by languages as well. So yeah, no, it's really complicated. So I mean, some of there's in the Kalahari, the Kripers, originally some of their family, they would have walked through from Namibia down. And they wouldn't necessarily have spoken a new language. They would have spoken Nama, and they still do, some of them. But then there's a family, the traditional leader up there at the moment is Richtersveld. His family were more from that area in South Africa, and they did speak the new language. So, there's different groups. There's quite a few different groups, and as I say, there's people there probably aren't really entirely sure which ones they came from. Because, you know, remember at one point when they were growing up, I mean, I met people who, before the land claim, were maybe on farms around the Northern Cape area and didn't even know their heritage, you know, because their grandparents were embarrassed to tell them they were Bushmen, because at that point, to be Bushman was really like, you didn't want to be Bushman, that was as bad as it could get. So, you know, parents and grandparents didn't necessarily tell their children. So when the land claim came around, like, researchers approached some people and they didn't even know they were, you know, they hadn't heard anything about being Bushmen. They thought they were coloureds. So, you know, some of the people, unless they got the information off their grandparents before they passed away, they don't necessarily know.
But I personally feel that some of that was strategically implemented precisely for that reason. It's like, nah, we're gonna take these people's land, we're gonna confuse them as to who they are, and so by the time they wanna come back and say, hey, hold on, we've been misled here, and it's like, no, well, you gotta prove it now. And then now when you try and prove it, you're like, hey, wait, my surname is misspelled, it's mixed here. Now it becomes an increasingly difficult thing to try and figure out. And I guess some of that was strategically engineered that way, specifically for that reason.
Yeah, and I mean, they weren't allowed to speak the language. It wasn't just that it died out. I mean, they weren't, but not only that. And David Kruiper used to talk about being on the farms, and if you spoke your language, the farm manager would be twisting your ear and beating you because you're not allowed to speak that. You have to speak Afrikaans, because obviously he wants to understand what you're saying. But I should mention as well, I mean, not to the same extent, but I'm from Scotland. And, in Scotland, we weren't allowed to speak our language as well. After the Battle of Culloden, the English come up and, and same in Ireland, we were essentially colonised. We weren't allowed to wear our traditional dress, the kilts. We weren't allowed to carry arms. We weren't allowed to speak Gaelic. And then, even when Gaelic wouldn't have been spoken throughout the whole of Scotland. It would have been spoken in the north. But, I've got friends. I used to work in the north of Scotland, and, I knew people who no longer spoke Gaelic, because although the family had, again, to be a Highlander who spoke Gaelic was really, you didn't want it, that was embarrassing. So,
So they make, it's a similar, it's the same thing that happened. They make your origin embarrassing, or they make it something that you kind of want to shy away from. Oh, no, I don't want to be called Bushman. Oh, no. When in fact, if you understand the history and the rich heritage behind what actually comes with that, it's like, hey, hold on, I actually want to be called that. That comes with more rich heritage than what you trying to rub off.
And it's quite funny because now it's quite an in thing to be Scottish. But I mean, there is more money being put into the Gaelic language. We've got Gaelic in some of the schools.
Is that what the language is called? Like Gaelic?
Gaelic language. Gaelic. So it's a Celtic language. The Irish also speak it. But what I'm not saying we're the same as the people here. I mean, we've got electricity, and we've got we've got much better, higher standards of living, but we still don't really have land. And a few communities recently, in the past maybe 20, 30 years, have got land back, community land. But it's quite different as well, because when you're living in these, and this is also something that people talk about, when you look at Indigenous people in maybe Canada, anywhere in North America.
Australia.
Yep, New Zealand. It's a different situation from here, because I suppose maybe in the Western Cape it's a bit different, but in Australia, etc., you've got really well-educated Indigenous people who are lawyers and who fight their case, and that's something the Khomani are missing. I think there's very few people who finish. A lot of people don't finish school. I know one girl that's been to university, and what we need is, and although there's a paradox about arguing that they need to engage in Western education, rather than keeping their Indigenous education, if they actually want to fight for their rights, they actually really need to be doing it themselves as well. Because quite often, if sometimes they'll say to me, if the government come, I'm going to tell them this, going to tell them that, and if I tell the government, or not just government, whoever, they'll say to me, well, why aren't they telling me themselves? And I'll say, well, because they feel a bit low in confidence and don't feel that they can come and talk to you about this. And the response is often, well, if it bothered them that much, they would. So that's why I feel, and I would like more of the kids to finish school and a good education, not just a rubbish education, a good education, and maybe to become lawyers and teachers, and then teach their own kids themselves the way they want to teach them, rather than always been relying on other people to come in and do it. I think that's what's really important. And so it's all very well getting land, but it has to be a really holistic approach, because the schools aren't really related to the land. So, when we need better education, that's not just for the Khomani, that's across South Africa as a whole. I think we need better education. I think the education system in South Africa has been very disappointing. And when South Africans and people are wondering about why the country hasn't done better since apartheid, I would really argue the case that partly that is education. And I'm not talking about everybody going to university, because not everybody needs to go to university. Because actually it's great to have a trade. I'm talking about people having a decent school, can leave school and read and write. and be able to read documents.
Basic things.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues you have in the Kalahari sometimes is you're having meetings with NGOs or government, minutes are dished out, and you can bet the majority of the Khomani sitting there can't adequately, critically read and engage
and understand
with what's in front of them.
These are basic, the most basic human rights that we're talking about. Education. It's one of the most fundamental things in this democracy. Water, healthcare.
Sanitation.
I mean, these are the most basic. Not talking about roads and, human rights, basic human rights that are not even being met. And I want to say this, one of the things that we go by, right, myself also, is there's a saying that we are not coloureds, we are the owners of the land. And that goes to deal with some of the issues that we've spoken, touched on earlier, is that the land claims, a lot of the things that pertains to the indigenous people are, you can't really pursue these things in a coloured classification, because the coloured classification is something that came on later, and it was used to erase that very community, their languages. Most of the languages are nearly extinct. Their cultures, their way of life, all of these things, and it goes, and maybe it's part of government's goal to try and further erode or erase their history, so that they would not remember any of those things, and further entrenching racial classifications, because now we all fall under this banner. The Chinese were coloureds, the Malays were coloureds, everybody's coloureds. The Khoi and the San were also coloureds, and those are foreigners in the sense that indigenous to Africa, and we fall under that same category. So I'm mentioning this in light of, you did a land claim. It's one of your PhD focused on that restitution land claim. So would you say, as far as when we're having a conversation, right, as far as the land mass of South Africa goes, that originally belongs to the Khoi and the San community, as far as what you've researched and so forth and what you know?
Well, I don't think you can really dispute it, because the Bantu-speaking people moved in from the north. They weren't here; they came in from the north.
I think a lot of the arguments around that right now is because even black is my assumption is that it is diluted their own history to a certain degree. A lot of them still know it, but now everybody needs to be. It's either black or white. So if you're black, you are from here. So in terms of the conversations right now in South Africa, insofar the ones I've been engaged in, is that the Nguni people, Bantu people, are indigenous to southern Africa. And there's a lot of research that has come out to say no, that they actually migrated from Eastern Africa all the way down. As a university, have there been studies relating to that?
Okay, it's kind of generally, it's accepted. Yeah, there's lots of research that,
it's understood and accepted that way.
Yeah.
It's not foreign. It's not a foreign concept.
Yeah.
But I think where the challenge comes in is that a lot of, and especially in the current South Africa, a lot of, and I'm going to say this with tongue in cheek and in air quotes, a lot of black people either don't know that or they don't want to admit or accept that is a reality. For obvious reasons, but that's my assumption.
Do you think that's because it kind of sort of displaces them as believing all this time that they were the first people or part of the first people of South Africa, and that they sort of find themselves in a similar predicament that
the brown people have found they're finding themselves in now
as displaced people, because they lost their root to this land?
I think, for a lot of the people here, I guess they feel as if they belong here. They've been here so long, and if they didn't, this is their home. But then, so do a lot of white people feel that as well. So it gets difficult. I think it's a really, I understand how difficult it is for people, because everybody feels they belong here, and that was what the new constitution wanted everybody to feel as well. But, at the end of the day, I think you have to cater for everybody's needs. And I worry that at the moment, so if we look at the dominant grouping in South Africa at the moment, or the Bantu-speaking peoples, population-wise, I think if we go back to your talk about, the colour classification, and it kept changing as well. They kept changing who was included as coloured over the years. But, I think if you collapse everyone at the moment who's Khoi and San and coloured, you can assume the majority of people who are coloured are Khoisan to a certain extent. You're looking at maybe 10% of the population, if that. And I think that's a problem because they're now no longer. At one point they would have been the majority, and for a long time they haven't been the majority. And I think that's the real challenge. Also, coupled by the fact that the groups are so split from each other as well. I think earlier on you also mentioned about to what extent do the Khomani engage with what's going on elsewhere in this country. It's quite difficult for them because a lot of the time they're just not included and just not invited. But then there is also a sensitivity that sometimes we do get people maybe coming up from Cape Town, from Khoi or San organisations, and they want to help, but they have to watch because they're better educated. And then the Khomani start feeling a bit, these people are trying to come and tell us what to do and take over just because they're better educated than us. So it's about getting that balance of, working together, but also being aware that people in the rural areas have got and they've got different education levels and different knowledge than maybe you have. So I think that's a challenge, people working together. I was down at the Khoisan symposium last year, and really the splits were really evident. Sometimes we couldn't even go on with the conversation because the different Khoi groups were so busy arguing amongst themselves. And that's quite sad to see, really, because that helps government.
The lack of unity is plays in the favor of the enemy. It's like, while you guys are fighting, we'll carry on.
Once you can sort yourselves out, then come and talk to us.
Exactly. But there was a point. No, it's fine. There was a point I thought about earlier, but it's fine.
I want to ask you, and maybe not to delve into this particular point, right? Is in terms of government and the education system that goes from school, primary school, high school, into university, and more especially university because it's an advanced institution of education. And sort of people are already, being able to think in a certain way and do certain things because it's adults at that stage. My question is there a particular reason why, in your view, government is sidelining the Khoisan issue, why it's not being included or really dealt with from an education perspective? I don't know if you understand my question.
No, it's really difficult. Whether or not they're not engaging with the Khomani and educationally because they're Khomani or because, it's also the coloured community are also at school up there. Or it's just because they're in the Kalahari and they can't be bothered. The Kalahari's not that, where this community live, it's not that hard to get to. It's 200 kilometres on a good tar road. So it's very accessible. It just costs a bit of money because you have to pay your fuel. But there's always reasons why government can't come or why money's... the other problem is the Northern Cape is the biggest province with the least population. So it gets less money. Huge amounts of unemployment. Everything you do in the Northern Cape costs money because you've got to bring stuff in. Even when I was up there, with the NGO project, they were building tented camps for tourism on the hunting farm that the Bushmen own. That stuff had to come from Pretoria. So everything you do is expensive. And also the other challenges that they've had is getting nurses, social workers and school teachers that want to live up there is also a challenge. And part of that challenge is because if you live there and you have children, there's no... Where do you want to send your kids to school? Do you want to send them to that school or would you maybe rather send them to a better school in Uppington? So if you do that, then your children aren't living with you. They're living with other family members or something in Uppington maybe. There's lack of accommodation. The accommodation that the police and the nurses and that are expected to stay in is not acceptable. by any means. So you can imagine, people feel as if, teachers are, they've spent time and energy and effort and money getting their qualifications, and then they're expected to live in accommodation you wouldn't want to live in. So, and also, the social worker, there's one social worker covers a huge area. It's ridiculous. And at the moment now, the last I heard, she was having to live in Uppington and travel up and down a couple of days a week because the place she'd been living was sold. So that's another issue, is the real lack of accommodation so it's hard to attract decent teachers or,
Sure, but the irony is you got one of the biggest iron ore mines right there.
It's not right there. The iron ore mine is quite a wee bit away. The iron ore mine is around Katu. It's not miles away. It's maybe 4 or 5 hours.
But it's in the Northern Cape as well, which is producing probably billions.
They do. I mean, the various mines have given money to various organisations, Khoisan organisations, but the money doesn't necessarily filter through to the community. Or we don't really know where the money goes.
There's a big issue also, because I think we spoke about it in the beginning, is sort of how government is imposing, and I think this goes back to the TKLA, the Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Act, which kind of tells them this is what you must do, this is how you must be structured, which is foreign to us as the indigenous people, to South Africa. And now in order to get land, in order to get certain things, you must forcefully be assimilated into a structure, otherwise you won't get that. You understand? So, and even, I'll look at even, for example, if you look at property rights and reparative justice and how all of the land claims work, that the land restitution is focusing more on property rights than on reparative justice. You understand?
Yeah.
And in a way, if we look at property rights, it is designed to protect how the Western system functions and how they acquired property. And in dealing with, because land is sort of a focal point of this discussion, and specifically that of the Khomani and the San. What is your view on that?
No, you're right. There has been, there's been land, and even when there's been government support, it's very much sort of technical or operational, or there's been nothing really to deal with people's spiritual well-being or to deal with the trauma that people have suffered in the past.
How do we bridge the gap? How do we bridge the gap between how we are functioning right now? Because, like I've said, you've dealt with the restitution land claim of the Khomani. You've did extensive research on that. How do we bridge the gap on how we're dealing with land claim issues from a property rights perspective rather than a reparative justice perspective? Because it's very different. And yeah.
No, I think it's a really good point. I think it's a really difficult point. I think certainly for the Khomani and for lots of communities throughout South Africa, there's substance abuse issues. And a lot of that, I think, are related to trauma. And none of it's been addressed. And to address it, and that would, well, it depends if when you talk about, I think to really make a difference, you have to address the issues, and to address them, you're looking at huge amounts of support, psychological, traditional, you'd have to look into sort of traditional remedies, psychological remedies. And I mean, part of it is the government, or would it be who would, and this is a thing that goes, in Australia we've had the big issues, in Canada about apologies from government. In the UK we're having issues at the moment of, there was a lot of Catholic mothers were forced to give their children up for adoption, and a lot of them have been found dead. And it's about getting government to apologise, even if it wasn't your government that did it. There's not really... in academic circles, there's recognition of the genocide of the Khoisan people, but I don't think...
Is there recognition?
Within academic circles, there's books written about it. That's sort of, I would say... Well, I suppose some people maybe don't accept it, but there's evidence there. I don't know that it's acknowledged generally by South Africa, or by the Dutch, or by the British, or anyone, you know. And although that wouldn't solve everybody's problem, an apology might be nice. But the difficulty, I think, for countries is they don't like to apologise, because then they worry that they're going to be asked for financial reparations.
Because in a way they'd be admitting to the...
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if that's why they kind of always try not to do
They'd
that.
be conceding to the fact that, we did kind of.
And I mean, it's so difficult. I mean, in countries like the UK, I mean, there's more and more recognition now about the role they played in colonisation. You know, the universities now, quite a few, University of Edinburgh, the University of Glasgow, have now written reports about how they benefited from sort of the slave trade, and how the country grew up under the, you know, the privileged, you know, the privileged situation of the UK, who they traded sugar and slaves and whatever. So there's more of that, and it's quite difficult, because also as somebody from that country, and you're aware that you've kind of benefited somehow, but then if you were asked to pay reparations, you also feel that, well, it wasn't me that did it.
Exactly.
And in fact, there was a thing recently, there's a Black History Week in Scotland, and I happened to be there a few years ago, and I only realised that at the end of slavery, and don't quote me on this, you would have to go and Google it, but there was money, there was compensation paid. Don't know if it was the slave traders, I think it was the slave owners. There was compensation paid, and that compensation was by the government to these people. That was still being paid up until like 10 years ago. So that means some of my taxpayers' money
was going to compensation.
Was for that. I mean, obviously the compensation had been paid years and years. You know, it's not been paid for years, but that was a loan, and we as taxpayers were paid. And they don't normally. You know, it's not something they're advertising. So, you know, and the idea that my tax was paying for that absolutely disgusts me and a lot of people. You know, it's like...
Can I ask you, Dr. Grant, why is it important that the indigenous people are represented in the media space?
I think not just the media. I think that they should be represented everywhere. And I do really feel that, you know, and this is going back to, you know, the education thing, until they can represent themselves in government spaces. You know, they're never going to get people who really feel for them and know what they're going through. You know, in media spaces, I think, I mean, they've got to be heard. How they're represented is interesting. So there's big dramas in it. Well, not big dramas, but, you know, there's people who feel that the Bushmen should be portrayed more modernly and not in the traditional gear. And there's a lot of Bushmen who like to dress traditionally. Certainly the people I stay with on Varrie dress traditionally a lot. Not every day, but, you know, when they go to work, they sell crafts at the stalls, they dress traditionally. If they're going to do dances, if they're taking tourists out, they dress traditionally. And it's not just because the tourists do like it, but it's not just for that. It's also because they feel proud of dressing like that, and they like to dress like that. I mean, there's still big debates going on over, you know, the films The Gods Must Be Crazy, because some people think it's demeaning to the Bushmen. But, you know, the people I live with up there, you know, I show them that they love it, and they don't see why there should be a problem with the way they dress. I think what's important is that while people can be portrayed in media like that, there also has to be the recognition that they're not living in the past, and they're not, you know, that they're modern people in the modern world with modern needs as well as maybe traditional needs. But I think, you know, I know there's some people who feel quite against that, you know, people shouldn't be dressing like that and promoting themselves as that.
But I mean, if you look at the Zulu culture, and how they've managed to keep both elements alive, where when it is Heritage Day, or when it is some sort of cultural day at school or at work or whatever, they can wear their traditional regalia, or even the kosa, or the, you know, where they're wearing, or the sutu. When they're having some sort of ceremony or an event or something, they dress in the traditional regalia, and there's no issue with that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work, you know, during the work day with a piece of skin there or whatever. It's obviously you can keep your tradition alive and culturally alive, but at the same time, you can assimilate to, I guess, what you would call modern society there.
But there seems to be a double standard, I think, sometimes, because you do get people come into not just the Kalahari, I also remember Platfontein, and just expect the Bushmen to all be walking about in traditional clothes. And I mean, I remember even being there, it was a Xhosa woman, because she was from Eastern Cape. They were there sometimes, people come up for medicine from the Bushmen, and they were getting medicine. She was talking to me, and she was saying, oh, I thought they would have been more traditional, you know? And I was like, what? She's like, well, you know, dressed in their skins and stuff. And then I said to her, so where are you from? She's, I'm from the Eastern Cape. And I said, and she said, I'm Khoisan. So I didn't want to ram the point down her throat, but I did kind of say to her, but you're just dressed normal as well.
Exactly.
Like in Western clothes as well. But she didn't get, I don't think she got my
because
point.
because technically, she should have been then wearing her regalia.
I think that is a very important, it's a very, very, very important point, because a lot of society, maybe not just only in South Africa, maybe globally, is that if the Khoisan person is not wearing that traditional attire, then he is not a Khoisan. How is this person a Khoisan? Because in people's minds, what is entrenched in their minds is a Khoisan looks like this, his hair looks like that, his cheekbones look like that, he wears this, and that is how a Khoisan person looks, which is not the case. People evolve, you get, being Khoisan is in your veins.
Yeah, no, and different...
and this was the perfect example you made of a so-called Bantu individual coming from wearing Western clothes. I'll call it Western clothes. But he still knows who she is without having to wear a bead or whatever the case is, to express to someone that I am this by wearing that.
Yeah, I think the important thing is, because I mean, there is a lot of romanticised imagery of the Bushmen, like, you know, as hunter-gatherers, and I think it's fine. But I think the important thing is also, if you're going to show that, people also have to see, you know, people like you guys. You know, so to show that not all, you don't have to be like that to be a Bushman, and not everybody's like that that's a Bushman or Khoi. Yeah, yes. Exactly. It's just some people, it's not everyone. And again, and it's some people, you know, in the Kalahari, some people are quite happy to dress like that, and other community members don't want to. So sometimes if somebody's looking for a guide, there's some guides that won't dress in their traditional clothes. And some love to do it. So, you know, and that's up to them. You know, if they don't want to do it, they don't do it. That's fine. So...
One of the, I think, and we're busy with closing now.
Yeah, we're closing
is one of the things that I believe is very, very important is there's a lot of stories that I grew up, for example, learning in school, the Holocaust of the Jews, stories of all different people except my story, my history, my ancestors. And to a certain degree, it's probably one of the worst, the most horrific stories the world has ever heard or seen. I mean, we were hunted
like animals
by a decree. We were declared subhuman, and we were exterminated.
By smallpox.
More than 3.5 million people. We were once the majority in this part of the world. Today we are not because we are disappeared. We were exterminated. There was a genocide that took place with my people. And I think it's important to be able to get that out, because once people know your story, then a lot of things begin to fall in place. Your rights are restored to you. You are acknowledged for who you are, not for who someone else tells you are. And I think that is a very, very critical and important, a very, very important point. And I think myself being part of the community, same community that you are, having conducted extensive research on, I think it's important to acknowledge and thank you also for the work that you've been doing, because you could have done it anywhere else. There has to be an interest. You saw something, there was a need. These are people with a need. They don't have the most basic human rights. I don't know what the Human Rights Commission is doing with regards to that. I don't know if you've launched.
Yeah, I see the human rights people every time I go.
But nothing changes. In fact, you mentioned that the situation there worsened over the last 20 years.
So my understanding is that so there was back in 2004 there was the Khomani went to the Human Rights Commission. There was a report, and then and that did address some issues at the school. There was issues of bullying and things, and then in 2016 I think it was, there was public hearings, Khoisan for the whole Khoisan community. We had them in Uppington. I made written representations and was there in person. Lots of us did. Then there was a report come out in 2018, and then there was a response to that report about what the government were to do, and then we don't know. I do, I've laid quite a few complaints on behalf of people. So they've written the complaint and I've handed it into the Human Rights Commission in Uppington. I've also made complaints to the Human Rights Commission in Uppington. Essentially, it just seems they don't have the money to deal with all the issues that they have in the Northern Cape. So that's that. It seems rather disappointing.
Yeah, no, but I guess that's the story of our lives. But I'm happy with where it is now. There seems to be a resurgence of consciousness of like, hey, we need to do something about this now. We can't pretend it didn't happen. A lot of people would wish it didn't happen. A lot of people are trying to pretend that it didn't, but it did. And we have to face it and address it and say, hey guys, this happened. It is what it is. How do we now move forward from here and find, forge a path moving forward? And it doesn't mean that just because we acknowledge this one truth, that somebody else's truth is not the reality. But because we have to acknowledge the fact that indeed, there were Dutch that came onto the land and pushed these people up. Indeed, there were British that came and pushed people up. Indeed, there was even Portuguese in 1400s that came in and already saw, hey, there's a nice land, the soil is conducive, the weather is nice. Let's start investigating what's happening here. It happened. It's a reality. You can't pretend it didn't happen. It happened. But at the end of the day, we need to acknowledge it and path the way forward and say, okay, guys, where do we go from here now? And it happened that the Nguni tribes came from where they came from. It happened. It happened that they're here now. It happened that they're a majority now. It's a reality. There's nothing you can do about it. But trying to pretend it didn't happen is not helping anyone either. It's not.
And we need to come up with solutions for it so that everybody can live a decent life.
Exactly.
Whatever life that is, and that differs from culture to culture. And that's the challenge just now that I think has not been met throughout South Africa, not just for particular groups. It's quite, coming from the UK, and remembering apartheid. And there was great hopes for South Africa. And then when I moved here, there was great hopes for South Africa. Yeah.
Still great hopes.
I'm still hoping.
Yeah. There's another point I think we never got to. We spoke about it before this. I think it's such an important thing. And this is something that we're dealing with actively as organizationally and so as individuals as well. Is we're dealing with two types of colonizations. We've been colonized by the Bantu community, Bantu Nguni community, and we've been colonized by the Western community. And it's so challenging to deal with issues like that because now it sort of makes other African people think that we're trying to isolate ourselves for negative reasons, which is not the truth. We want to be the people we were, distinct people, and respect people for who they are. And I think it's important, that should actually be a subject of conversation, is that how we were colonized by the Bantu and Nguni community, how we were colonized by the Western community, because we were colonized by both.
And remember, there's physical colonization, but there's also mental colonization as well.
Yes.
But I mean, look at, I know I keep reflecting back in Scotland, but I mean, look at, so in Scotland, we've got in Britain, we've got Scottish people, we've got Welsh people, we've got Irish people, and English people, and they're all quite distinct. I mean, we all have, there's similarities in culture, but I mean, we have very different, histories and traditions, like the dancing and the singing, and but we all still manage to, benefit from a particular standard of living while maintaining our old cultures. And I think that's what I'm not saying ours is perfect, but that's ideally what you want, sort of multicultural society rather than one where you assimilate, cultures are assimilated by other cultures, so everybody's the same. That would be so boring as well, wouldn't it?
Very boring.
But we have to call it a show. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us this morning. I think it was an insightful conversation. I think that conversation can carry on for a much longer time. And oftentimes conversations like these, I've found, you know, we've been doing interviews like this for a long time, and oftentimes when the camera's off, it's almost like you switch it back on, because that's where, I don't know if you've ever noticed, like
100%.
before the conversation or after the conversation, that's where all the jewels really do come out, excuse the pun. It really does come out, because then the conversation becomes more like less formal, and we get to really get into the nuts and bolts of things. But outside of that, I think that the conversation was very insightful. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all the research that you've done. Like Larry mentioned earlier, I think we do benefit from that research. Is there a place where we can read some of your
Publication.
Yeah, I mean, my PhD is online, and it's a bit out of date now as far as, like, you know, the situation. That some things are worse, some things are better, but it does give quite a good history of the land claim. You know, we're talking about the different groups that were involved, and also the history of the Khomani, so that's all there. And also some of my other papers are open access online as well. So I don't,
Okay,
you
so
can
we
maybe
can
put
check it
links to them or something.
Yeah, please,
I
if you can,
send you.
Clayton, if we can add links later on just to the
Yeah.
description. And so for people, so guys, if you are watching online, there's a bunch of comments happening. I don't know if Larry wants to deal with any of those comments, but if you are watching and you do want to find Dr. Julie's publications, we will definitely put the links down in the description after the show, and you're able to check it out over there. So do you want to deal with any of it, or should we?
And I think we can call it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Don't forget, on Wednesdays we deal with these kind of conversations. We also got something coming up which we will let you know as time continues. We're just trying to confirm everything before we get into it. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you.
Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years, 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.